Hi, everybody. How are you? Everybody needs to take off their mics for one quick second and say hi.
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 Hi. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hey, what's up?
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Welcome to Annenberg Intelligence. As you know, today we are joined by Steve Stoute, the author of Tanning of America and the CEO and founder of Translation and UnitedMasters. As our own professor, Alyssa Richardson, described him recently to me, he has done such trailblazing work at the intersection of hip hop, culture, and business. He is a true legend. Steve will do a proper hello to you in just a sec. I want to introduce my student co-moderators today, and you can wave as I introduce you. Alex Negrin, who's a senior majoring in PR with a music industry minor. Cosette Renab is also studying PR along with cinematic arts. And then John Salih and Stephanie Abadan, they are second year graduate students in our strategic public relations program. And of course, Reggie Beckton, thank you for the music and the slides and helping us get ready for today and produce today. We're going to cover a lot of ground with the co-moderators, but we're also going to be saving time for student questions at the end. So as always, use the chat. And if I can, I'll call on you and let you unmute yourself and ask your question directly. So before we get started, Steve, with you, I thought what we'd do is take a look at a video that gives us a sense of how a master of branding brands himself. So let's take a look at the video.
The founder and chief executive of Translation.
He's a former record label executive.
And also the author of a book, The Tanning of America.
He was that bridge, that voice for hip hop and for business, you know, where that met. You know, and anyone that brilliant, you know, you want to have him around.
But the advertising executive of the year? An author? I don't understand.
Mr. Steve Stoute is here.
Yes.
There's a generation that grew up and said, we're going to find what we have in common rather than find what we have different. There's a very strong thing that brought these people together. There's very few things that can bring these people together. It was tanning. It was a mental complexion that felt very similar. We help bring global culture together. That's what I wanted to get out there, and that's what this project was for. And I said, I'm going to use the same premise that hip hop used to break down boundaries. I'm going to bring that into the advertising business.
Tonight, I hope you take a minute to just enjoy what's possible when people from all walks of life have the freedom to go as far as their talents can take them. That's what made in America means.
And I can't say that what you're going to see from me 10 years from now is what will make sense today.
So Steve, welcome. Fantastic to have you with us. I should also point out to everybody that Steve is so incredibly generous with his time and with Annenberg students that we actually made a pilgrimage to Brooklyn to Translation a year and a half ago. So thanks for hosting us there too. And thanks for doing a house call today.
Thanks for having me, Willow. I truly enjoy having the opportunity to speak to young people who are crafting their career and trying to figure out what to do next. And it's something that I have a great deal of passion for, because I remember specifically when I was in those same shoes. I never lost memory or sight of that. So I always like to speak from the perspective that I wish somebody had spoken to me from at that time. You know, so doing this is an honor and a privilege. Fantastic.
So, you know, Alyssa, as I noted, Richardson called you a legend. You've been called a visionary. You're a brand builder. I almost see you as a seer, you know, able to see into the future, to see around corners. You know, you're somebody who understands what shapes culture and understands how to move culture, right? And leveraging people, brands, assets in order to do that. But how would you describe your kind of secret sauce, your superpower, your special talent?
Before I answer that, is the sun
If you could move a little to your left, it's not terrible, but it's just hitting your, what looks like the right side. Yep.
I can get rid of it entirely.
Oh, there we go. And he does his own lighting, everyone.
Yeah, is this better?
Perfect. Yep, it's great. Perfect.
Okay, yeah, good. So, look, I all those monikers are fine and they're good. It's something I've always believed I had one skill that was a superpower of mine, which was pattern recognition. I don't believe that things change over time, but then they go back to the way they were. And if you are a student of the present, then you will actually be able to understand where this had taken place before in the past. And then you find out what that then means, the unintended or intended effects of that pattern. And I see it in technology, I see it in culture, I see it in all aspects of business. And it's obvious to me as a result of it. I wish I could tell you that I could predict the future, but the future, a lot of it has remnants of the past. But you got to know where it came from in order to make that connection. And it's something that I slow down and I stay present. I don't let things pass by. Everything that takes place in real time happens in slow motion to me. And I do that on purpose so I can really grasp what's taken place and try to find where has that taken place before in history.
And I'm assuming you've used that pattern recognition in your career, which has been an entrepreneurial career, starting new businesses, disrupting industries. We know, and I know you feel strongly about thinking about this term of entrepreneur and what it means, but we're living in an era of great fascination and maybe romanticization of the term entrepreneur. We're also seeing just recently through COVID, a real entrepreneurial spirit, I would say a resurgence of that. Americans are starting businesses now at the fastest rate in more than a decade. We know half will fail if history is our guide, if pattern recognition holds true here. But we also know that they provide a critical engine of job creation. So when you think of this idea of being an entrepreneur, what does it mean to you? And what's the advice and the caution that you have around following an entrepreneurial path? And sorry, that was a long question.
Yeah, I got it. I know where you're going with this. So I started my career, I didn't realize this, when I was 15 years old, I would go to the flea market every Saturday and Sunday, and I'd set up tents, basically, tents where the vendors would sell their goods and services. And I would, get there early enough to try to set like 5 or 6 of them up. I'd get $5 each. And then one of those vendors would hire me for the day, and I'd do sales for the day, and then I'd help break them down and break a few others down. And I did that every time, for like 3 years. That was my thing. And I realized that my friends didn't want to get up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday to get there early and do that. And I didn't want to get up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday and do it either. But for some reason, I felt like there was no choice, and they felt like they had the option. Now, I don't know why. It wasn't like I needed that money to eat, or it was something of dire circumstances. It was innate to me that there was an opportunity there, and going there and setting up tents, I could make, $40 at 15 years in 1984 or 1985, whatever, those years. And I had to do it. And that attitude has never, ever left the spirit of who I was. Even when I took jobs inside of, Interscope Records, working for Jimmy Iovine and Sony Music, I was still entrepreneurial within those companies, trying to push those companies to do things that was obvious. In fact, my aha moment on how I went from music to advertising was in 1997. I made the soundtrack to the film Men in Black. And we sold 10 million albums and 14 million glasses. And the record company was super satisfied that everybody was getting jiggy with it and dancing to the music of the soundtrack and loving the sales of the album. And I was satisfied with that, and I was happy, of course. But I didn't understand why we didn't get any attribution and make anything from the glasses. It didn't make any sense to me. And that was no different than getting up at 6 a.m. and going to the flea market to me. Like, rather than being content, why don't I go figure out how to get to the glasses? And it was getting to the company that did the product placement of those glasses, which actually led me to the advertising business. And I ended up owning that company. And then we sold that company when I was 30 years old. So the entrepreneur spirit and what that meant to me was since I was 15. I didn't know that the word was entrepreneur, Willow. No one said that. It wasn't a glamorous term. It was get up at 6 a.m. and go to the flea market. That's what the term was. It wasn't, the word entrepreneur, or words in general, sometimes these titles, when they're glamorized and they're marketed to you, you can get romanced by it, but really get romanced by the moniker and the marketing, not by the fundamental intricacies of what that word means and what matters to make that word come alive for you. I found out I was an entrepreneur because somebody told me. I didn't know that. And now, as time has evolved, that word entrepreneur, specifically what happened in the tech market in Silicon Valley with social media and guys building, and Mark Zuckerberg, and building companies from the garage, and that term entrepreneur and venture capitalist, both of those words, they go hand in hand. They've become so romanticized that people now think that that's the field to do by default. Like, I'm going to school to become an entrepreneur. Or I'm like, being an entrepreneur it's so painful. It's so painful.
Painful how, Steve?
Yeah, I'm trying. My face, please get close to my face, because my facial expression is going to give you a lot of the words here. A lot of us wanted to play professional sports, but the meritocracy in sports made it very clear you couldn't make it to a D1 school or make it to the pros. So there was a binary cutoff point for you to go, that's it, I didn't do it. The problem is entrepreneur doesn't have that. So you'll just keep going and going and going and not even know that you're not making the progress required or have the skill set required to go on your own. You're just so busy chasing the word entrepreneur and what that word means to you that you don't even know that you don't have the attributes to be one. And that's not negative. Like being not good enough to make it to the NBA or the NFL isn't negative. Being an entrepreneur means that, for me, that regardless of the outcome, you're going to keep running towards darkness. I would always say to my guys, when we were building UnitedMasters, the hoodie that I proudly wear, I would say to my guys when I was building it, I said, when the settlers came to America and they were going on those excursions, how did they know the difference between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean when they were going west? How did they know? They had never gone that far west before. So how did they know the difference between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean? They just kept going. They just kept on going towards the unknown. And in an entrepreneur, the way you think about it, the unknown is better than the known. And you keep chasing the unknown. the resourceful nature of approaching problem solving. When I came up, it's one of the things I learned in the music business early, because hip hop in the mid 90s, as it was a fledgling industry that no one thought would go all the way, had a lot of people who gravitated towards it who happened to be entrepreneurs. So you'd go into a meeting, you'd go get a job. It's the late, great Andre Harrell, a guy who touched my life, changed my life. And you'd go for an interview, and they'd ask you a couple questions, and then you'd say, like, what's my job? What am I doing? And the response would be, make it happen. Your job was to make it happen. No handbook, no rule book, make it happen. And some people were petrified by the lack of clarity, and some people were thrilled by the lack of clarity. But the amount of people that were thrilled were maybe 3. The rest of them were doing it for reasons that made no sense. They were happy to be a part of something that was a shiny music business entity. They had no idea what they were doing, or didn't know how to figure out what they were doing. And they kept kicking the can on the truth. That it wasn't for them. And that's the pain of being an entrepreneur. You can kick that can for a really long time. There's a lot of sad stories of people who, found out very late in life that they weren't who they thought they were. So I just say to you, be honest. I would tell people who work for me, my company, don't let anybody tell you something about yourself that you don't already know. Any young person, please listen to what that really means. Do not let anyone tell you anything about yourself you don't already know. There's a lot of negativity, a lot of things that we need to work on and improve on that's packed in that statement. You need to know that before anybody else. So, as an entrepreneur, those are some of the daunting things. I mean, that's just to get to first base. I'm not talking about funding, missing payroll, can't sleep at night, all of the things that keep you on edge, that keep you, they keep you sharp, but it keeps you on edge. I asked Beyonce this question. I said, do you have butterflies when you go on stage? She says, every single time. And the time when I lose the butterflies is when I know I need to stop. Right? And butterflies, people get that reaction and they back off. They can't move forward with it. And then some people like her or entrepreneurs with sleep and anxiety or whatever it comes of, the unknown, you get comfortable with it. You learn to fall in love with the unknown. You learn to love the pain of hard work.
Steve, I know Alex has a question about what you've learned from starting those businesses. So I'm going to let her unmic and ask that.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for joining us. And being in the music industry, I definitely know you as a leader, a role model, and a forward thinker for the industry. So I was really curious of how UnitedMasters and Translation have allowed you to learn new things about the advertising world and the PR world.
Oh my God. I started Translation in 2004, and I had no idea how to fill out an invoice to charge a client. So I had an office, I had 5 people, and when the first person said yes, I didn't know how to invoice them. And so fundamentally, it taught me really building a business infrastructure, like the accounting department and HR and all of the infrastructure needs to run a business that you want to compete best in class. So I learned that early. Secondly, you realize when you work with mid-level vice president, directors of marketing, CMOs, that a lot of times nepotism reigns supreme. There's nothing you can say. They don't want to buy it from you. Period. So you think there's something, and if you don't know that, you start to think there's something wrong with you, and they'll send you in a tailspin. When the real problem is you had no shot from the beginning. And that's a very important distinction, because when you realize that, you don't take offense to it and make yourself feel like maybe it's, you need to prepare better or be better. But you gotta go through enough of that to realize the attributes of somebody who is willing to. It doesn't cost. I teach my people another thing. Write this down. It doesn't cost them anything to waste your time. You got on the plane. You got to the meeting. You walked in and pitched it. You just put 12 hours of your life on the line, and within 3 minutes, they've already predetermined they're not doing business with you. It doesn't cost them anything to waste your time. And you got to know when that's happening, because there's clearly a disastrous effects if that continues, as time is your biggest asset. From a PR perspective, I learned that it's a double-edged sword. Every time I do something that's publicly profiled, and it comes out good, because I believe that they're only trying to, and it's not me, I think they set you up to break you down. You got to walk away from it before, this is personal branding. You got to walk away from the press before, it's like musical chairs. There's going to be a time when the music stops and there's no chair, and they're going to just take you down. So I've been very careful with that. But for companies, what I realize is that what motivates them from a press perspective, PR perspective, is ever changing. A lot of companies, the people inside the company just make decisions not to get fired. They're not trying to come up with anything new. They're not trying to push anything. They just want to do whatever it takes not to get fired. So if there's a hot topic that's taking place in the marketplace, like influencer marketing and using a specific influencer, you can go with another company. They'll want to use that same influencer because they know that it's going to get press, it's going to make them look cool, and they can't get fired for doing that. So I've used press a lot to help inform what the category of companies respond to, because I know that they're reading everybody else's press and they want that same press for themselves. So I go to them with ideas that were around that topic, because I know that's the decision they're going to make next. It's not necessarily, it's not always the right answer, but when you're building a business and you're in sales and transactions, and you want to be able to get as many leads as possible, and reading the tea leaves of press and what's moving the market definitely helps inform your approach and who you go to.
Thank you.
Steve, I want to change directions somewhat, and our public relations master's program now is public relations and advertising. So I want to talk to you about your take on the advertising business. You've been in the business for 20 years, and you've been increasingly clear and increasingly vocal in your criticism of that business. And recently you wrote a letter to the National Association of Advertisers, again, extremely pointed and critical, saying things like, with the privilege of profiting from the purchasing power and influence of the African-American community comes the responsibility to understand it, and being intensely critical of a lack of commitment to really understanding that community. Give us your assessment of the business and what you think your role is in calling their attention, the industry's attention to these issues and getting them on a different path.
So when George Floyd was murdered and every white CEO knew they had to do something because they were into question. The world had shifted. Black Lives Matter, the second phase of it had kicked in, and corporations led by Caucasian men had to say something. My phone was ringing a lot often. It still rings.
Mm-hmm.
And my point of view on it was, I started reading things that sounded like things I've heard before, like we got to do better. And we're going to publish our diversity report. And I'm sitting there thinking, you said that 5 years ago after Trayvon Martin was murdered. You said that many, many times, and yet you always have the same face and the same reaction as if you're now going to get onto it. And I'm sick of that. So in my industry, the advertising industry, the media and advertising industry, the industry that is so prolific in creating brands, so prolific in understanding where things are going, so prolific in perception. How could that industry be in the same predicament as other companies as it relates to lacking diversity? And I'm sick of it. And I said to, that if you're the same standards in which brands hold companies responsible to help deliver profits or deliver success, like, I'm going to give you this contract, and in exchange, I expect great work as measured by A, B, and C. Why don't you hold diversity to those same standards? Because there's two things that's very important about diversity. Number one, ethnic insights lead to mainstream insights. That's not a theory, that's just a fact. Like, emerging subculture leads to popular culture, right? 25 years ago, skateboarding was subculture. 25 years ago, gaming was subculture. 25 years, gaming is bigger than the film and music industry. 25 years later, skating is an Olympic sport. These are not fake things. Ethnic insights and emerging subcultures eventually lead to mainstream culture. So, if that is true, because it is, why wouldn't you have diverse people within your company? It's good for business. It's not only is it morally right and fair, and of course, ethical, but it's also commercially viable. So if you're a brand and you go to a company and it's just filled with all white men, you got to know you're not getting the best work. It's not saying that you're getting the worst work, but you're certainly not getting the best work. But I feel like that even if you go to a company, it's just all black people. You're not getting the best work. It takes diversity to make the best out of all of us. We need that. The fact that we don't know that is disturbing to me, especially in the advertising and media business, where it's all driven by creativity, ideas, perception, branding. Like, you need that. So I've been very vocal and very critical. I've called out big names. I'm not afraid of that. There's more to come. There's more to come about holding them accountable and working with organizations such as the 4As or the Ad Council to hold advertising companies responsible to hold their vendors responsible for diversity quotas, but really held responsible, and a third party checking that.
Is that part of your 5-point plan?
Yeah, it's part of my 5-point plan. The other part of my 5-point plan is, you have these companies, you want to do something funny, you can pick a bunch of different companies and go, all you got to do is look at who we are, and you scroll, and I guarantee you, you look at 2 big companies, by the time you get to the third one, you'll be able to identify the chief diversity officer before you look at the title. It's the same casting, it's the same bullshit. And you know what? The chief diversity officer needs to be empowered. You know, when you have a chief diversity officer, really what you're saying, that we need to police our own diversity. You already know you got a problem. We're not going to be diverse unless we have somebody that's called the chief diversity officer. That's crazy. And you really don't, and you really only have them there to check a box. Because if the CEO really believed in diversity, he wouldn't need a chief diversity officer. But if you need to have the aesthetics that you are socially correct, you hire a chief diversity officer. And then what I found when I interview chief diversity officers, that they have one job and one big job only. Make sure that Black History Month is taken care of. These are facts.
So I'm going to let Stephanie jump in because I know that she has a question about what role employees can play in this. Stephanie, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Steve, again for being here with us. I'm really excited to be having this conversation. So in a recent interview on Katie's podcast, Out of the Office, you spoke about the importance of keeping companies accountable, and you addressed a lot of high-level actions that should be taken with brands. But I'm curious as to what kind of advice you have for PR or advertising employees within corporate structures that would also allow them to take part in holding their companies accountable.
I think that's put another way, Stephanie, great question. How can we help, right?
Yeah.
How can those of us who work for places or study at places help?
I've seen a lot of, it's time to strike now. People are listening. But like, the window is cracked. And I've seen it happen at, I can only give you examples of it. I haven't worked at a company in a very long time. So it's very hard to find, for me to just be very specific here, but I can give you the sentiments on what I would do, or what I think I would do. Right now, there's a lot of empathy, real empathy, for trying to understand what did we do wrong. A lot of well-intended company leaders that happen to be white don't realize some of the things that they did or that have been systemic in the organization that offends Black people. Black people, women as well, Black people and women have worked in companies, and for a long time, it's become so systemic that you've accepted behavior that wasn't fair and didn't even realize that it wasn't fair. So I started a beauty company years ago called Carol's Daughter. And I remember I was interviewing women, and Black women, and they would wear their hair different in real life than they did for work, because they felt like if they went into work that way, it would be offensive, or it wouldn't be accepted, or it'd be a problem. What I found is that white people didn't even know this. They didn't know that they felt that way. So there's a lot of just, so I don't want you to take away that companies are racist, but the systematic nature in which they were built. Both sides are guilty of not being honest. The Black employees don't talk about the things that aren't, culturally respectful of them, whatever protocols it is, whatever holidays they may take off, whatever takes place in the lunchroom, whatever it may be, may not necessarily be understanding towards your ethnicity. And the company's thinking, we've been doing this for 30 years. No one's ever said anything. I didn't know it was a problem. So I would say, create an audience of concerned people who want to fix that company, not go on Glassdoor and do the bullshit. Really structured dialogue with a group of people who want to help fix that company is the best way to get it done. The opposite of that is a bunch of people writing anonymous notes on Glassdoor trying to get somebody fired or do that kind of thing. That's not productive. So Stephanie, that's how I would approach it.
And what, Steve, what might a, thanks Stephanie, what might a productive path look like?
In that conversation?
Working within a company.
I think that if you have the conversation and you put together the things that matter to you most, you prioritize the priority versus, there's so many things. You got to put them in somewhat a sensible order, because you're not going to boil the ocean on something that's been going on for hundreds of years. And in corporate America, it's baked into the employee handbook. You gotta get there, to me, in a way that has clear 2, 3, 4 things that matter most to create the momentum around the discussion. If it's a company that does not have its intentions well, you should leave. Clearly, you shouldn't work any place. That threshold for that stuff is over with, right? If there's no concern for you and your ethnicity and the boundaries that you want to live your life and what you expect from the workplace, and that's women and the nature of how you're spoken to and how you get paid, and as Black people in respect to how you get treated and how you get promoted and the opportunities and the lack of senior leadership and XYZ. So I do believe that it's about having a constructive conversation with your leader, and I would do it with a group of people. So I would bring 4, 5, 8 people together who are of the same values that need to be shifted, and then having that dialogue. They're not ignoring it right now. Not well-intended companies. They're not ignoring that right now.
And another question that came up in the chat, which is a good one for our students. And if you are an intern at a company, is there a role for you to play?
Interns at our company has done really well. Interns at our company have done extremely well as it relates to bringing their cultural insights to the table. Usually most interns are closer to youth culture. And I love when they bring that raw perspective to our company. We embrace that. You can bring as much scholastic Ivy League education as you want. I also value the kid who's walking on the street, looking at what everybody's wearing, what everybody's listening to, and what everybody's talking about. To me, that's where those things come together and create magic. And interns are really good at that kind of stuff. And the most culturally curious interns we end up hiring, one of them worked for us, a guy named Joel Rodriguez. He came in 9 years ago as an intern. He was a rapper. And he's been with me for so long, and he's so talented, but he had no advertising skills. But we had won the AT&T business, and he was so gifted at coming up with crafting the idea for AT&T that when they presented it to their 13,000 employee workforce, the idea, they asked him to do it. And it was because he was a rapper, he could actually present the work to the workforce at that scale with no problem. And I was so proud of him that he came in as a rapper. We taught him the advertising business, and because he rapped, because he was an artist, he was able to then present that work to our biggest client. I mean, that's the story of an intern at Translation. I really do, and that comes from the top down, treating interns and their raw talent with respect and a seat at the table.
I'm going to change topics and turn it over to some students again. You know, one of the things that came up in our pre-conversation a lot was Black Lives Matter as a movement and its messaging and its branding, if you will, and wanting to get your take on that. Cosette, I know both Cosette and Stephanie have questions on this, but Cosette, since you haven't had a chance yet, I think I'm going to toss it over to you.
Sounds good. Hi, Mr. Stoute. Thank you so much for being here. So right now we see social media playing a major role in these social movements, whether that's Me Too or Black Lives Matter, climate change, political topics. And so I'm wondering what your advice is to activists that are trying to use social media in a productive way, what they can do to really productively get a message across.
I think Black Lives Matter is being co-opted. And Stephanie, if you listen to the Katie interview, you know my point of view on this. It's being co-opted. That the intent of Black Lives Matter was a great statement. It started many years ago, and it was about, you know, you can't keep killing our Black people this way. You got to know that they matter. They make a difference. They contribute to society. Please stop. Please, no, we matter. And in the wake of George Floyd, it's turned into that mixed with violence. And, you know, people on the far left and the far right, you know, committing violent protest, crime, and then wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt or writing it, vandalizing, using Black Lives Matter, and really just making it a peaceful movement and demonstration of inclusion to a violent criminal organization, or it has remnants of a criminal organization attached to it. And I think that that's wrong. My only wish for Black Lives Matter, it feels like a franchisee model versus somebody who leads it. I wish there was a CEO and somebody that led it, that could speak for the organization day in and day out, and that people followed that person's leadership and guidance. But right now it does feel like a franchisee model where, you know, different factions with different versions of expressing themselves under the Black Lives Matter moniker, and they're taking the liberty to do that at their own, with their own path and their own set of rules. And I just hope that when we look back on this in history, that it was a positive, peaceful shift in society, not something that was attached to crime and violence.
I'm gonna have my students open their mics, and if you want to follow on this, you should. And John, I know you have a different topic, but if you want to follow up on this, go for it.
Yeah. Hey, Steve. Thanks for joining us today. It's a pleasure to hear from you.
Hey, John.
So what impact did you see The Tanning of America have on the advertising and marketing industry after its release?
When I first released the book in 2011, I was so proud, John, so proud that I did it. I wrote a book. Proud that I knew that every page of that book captured everything I had, all of my experiences on this topic. In that journey, I went to the Census Bureau in DC. Now, the Census Bureau looks like a prison. It has barbed wire fences. It literally looks like a prison. And I go to meet the head of the Census Bureau, a gentleman by the name of Steve Stoute. And I walk in and I start talking about the idea, and I wanted to interview him. And I remember thinking, man, this is a reach, Steve Stoute. Why are you going to the Census Bureau? But for some reason, something made me know, take the afternoon and go to DC and meet this guy. So I go in the office and he goes, and I start telling him, and he goes, "You're looking for me. I'm the right guy." I said, "Tell me why." He goes, "Because my 25-year-old white daughter is getting married to a 25-year-old African-American. And I'm watching how my family's dealing with that. And I understand why it's happening, but I also understand why my parents don't." And his honesty led me to dialogue with him that was phenomenal. And he first laid out these things called Mythbusters. I remember the first one he said to me was 92% of Hispanics under the age of 19 are born in America. And I was blown away by that, because all of the marketing intelligence would never suggest that. Because if 92% of Hispanics under the age of 19 are born in America, they're more like speak Spanish at home and English as their primary language outside the household, which would change the dynamic dramatically. In fact, it made me want to make television commercials that the person spoke Spanish and English inside the same TV commercial. And I still don't see that. But he had a bunch of these things. And then he said something to me that was really dramatic, which was the US government wants the census information out there. So if you want to present our findings to a client, the government will pay for us if you set up the introduction. I took this guy to everybody. I took him to State Farm, Budweiser. I took him to every client, and he would throw out these numbers showing this shift in demography, showing that by 2024, what the skin color in America would look like based off of marriages, based off of babies, based off of all of the census data. And it was so much intel. I mean, like things like before 1980, Hispanics were counted as white people on the census forms. It's just so many flaws to it. So many, and the impact of it in how federal aid is distributed, where how voting lines are drawn, are all based off the Census Bureau, voting rights, money, impact, community, but no one really knows that, and the census forms are obviously taken as a joke. No one really feels like they should fill out census forms because it's going to make a tremendous difference, but yet he taught me all of that. So taking all of that information, John, when I look at today, everything that I wrote in The Tanning of America has come to fruition. You see it right now. There's, hip hop artists playing at every bar mitzvah in America. It's, fashion. I use this analogy. There's a 17-year-old white kid in Greenwich, Connecticut that has a lot in common with a 17-year-old black kid from Compton, California. And, that I knew The Tanning of America. I wrote that phenomenon was taking place and that hip hop was a cultural connector, not just the music, but the clothing, the language, the dialogue, the mannerisms, everything about that. And immediately everybody didn't get it. Everyone really gets it now. It took 10 years. And it's very, very hard. It was very hard for me with that book because when I wrote it, I gave everything I got, but it was before its time. And now everybody gets it and people look back at it and they acknowledge that it was one of the game changers as it related to documenting the shift in America. And my proudest moment was my daughter's school. It was required reading, and she that was just random. Like they had a professor who made that required reading for the school.
And Steve, we see that here, as well. Thus, Professor Richardson popping on to say hello, and Professor Kuhn, who is a cultural communication scholar and others. So your book is required reading in a few of our classes as well as it should be. I'm going to open this up. Stephanie had a really fun question that I thought would be a great end question. Stephanie, if you want to do that, and then we'll open it up.
For sure. So a little bit like you were saying, when I was growing up, you know, the artists, the hip hop artists, they were like my generation's like cultural leaders. And I'm curious to know who you think the up and coming cultural leaders are that's gonna help us utilize, that we'll be able to help utilize in the industry to actually bring about change.
Oh, it's certainly left outside of, you know, hip hop music has not, has kind of, there's still fragments of it in there, but it's certainly not as impactful in its dosage as it used to be as it relates to driving culture. I see a lot of it with great content creators who are picking up cameras and making statements and writing comments that are brilliant and insightful. I think, you know, we all, when everything took place after the George Floyd murder, you've seen people that you never even knew before speaking so eloquently about change and what it means to be American and what they expect. And these people are going to be the next version of local community leaders and people who are driving change, and they're using their social channels to make a difference. I see it moving away from music. But the other thing that I want to add is you see the impact of sports. I think what the NBA has done, you know, Willow would tell you, you know, when Rodney King was beaten, Willow was working with the NBA at that time, during that period of time. Were you there then, Willow? Yeah. And trying to get an NBA athlete to speak on that publicly in a way that was profound, and the NBA taking a movement against that, that wasn't even expected. That wasn't expected from Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, none of the guys at that time. It just wasn't their place as an athlete to have a comment on that. And now, you know, 25, 30 years later, athletes are leading the charge to the point where they were willing to walk off the court. So I do believe that it's, you know, again, content makers and creators that are coming out of these communities, music not so much anymore, but certainly athletes, specifically basketball.
Great segue, Steve, because we're having Chris Paul join us for a conversation on Monday. So looking forward to talking to him about, you know, I think what is an extraordinary leadership role.
You gotta show him, started with the Cliff Separated at Birth commercial I did with him and Cliff Paul. I mean, just the 60-second, because when that commercial literally changed his life.
Yep.
It made him so famous. And he loved playing that character. So if you started, I'm sure it would bug him out.
Okay. I'm gonna put Reggie on that to pull that. I missed the. Is it bad of me to say that I missed the original wave of Chris Paul commercials on State Farm? Those, I'm a little old school. Those are my favorite.
No, Reggie, it's called Separated at Birth. Okay. It's the first one. Okay. It's fantastic. They start off as babies inside of not a nursery room, but what's the room that you give birth? The babies are in the
NICU. Yep.
It starts off.
They're little incubators. They were in their incubators.
Yes.
Okay. Good tip for Monday. All right. I'm going to open this up. Gordon, if you want to ask that follow, go for it. You know, in the absence of student questions, I don't know if you're on the spot.
No, this is fascinating, and I just want to thank you. I think I'm as much of a fan of all the students and having read your work and followed your work to hear your take. But I have to ask, you had a really provocative comment that as a historian and a scholar, a lot of questions of social movements, that they're oftentimes trace. It's the personalization, it's the centralization that makes the eventual decline. I was really fascinated by your comment about the observation of Black Lives Matter as a franchise model. And, I think, for instance, in some of our classes, we've studied the effectiveness of the LA franchise, as it were, in being sophisticated about the way the demonstrations would be seen differently than they were decades ago in terms of the location. So, but it's a provocation. I had to ask you if you wouldn't mind following up a little further. What do you see differently about how the trajectory or the cultural impact, if Black Lives Matter is more centralized, to your point, in I guess the way more traditionally think about a social movement with a leader and kind of a central organizing roles? But thank you.
It wouldn't be able to be co-opted. Somebody would be able. The problem. One of the things that takes place with any movement, and this is highly sensitive, but I gotta be honest with you when I talk like this. I'm gonna act like your family here. If I watched this with the Me Too movement, absolutely in the beginning, Harvey Weinstein, animal, put him under the jail cell, the whole thing. And then you started seeing over time, some women come out and say, wait a minute, we went out on a date, this, that, and the third, like, what's his name? The comedian, the Indian comedian.
Aziz Ansari.
Yeah, right? And it's like, wait a minute. And then it started going so far, and you're like, well, when is a woman gonna come out and say, guys, like, you're disrespecting the Me Too movement because, like, there's some real women who went through some really hard, tough times. That's gonna have long-term effects for them. And you're like taking the moment to throw in a bad date and using that as a Me Too thing, and the New York Times is gonna write it because they have nothing to write anyway. And it's like unfair to the movement. And in Black Lives Matter, I'm waiting for some Black person, I'm saying it, like, they're Black, but they're not Black Lives Matter. I don't think robbing a Montclair store is Black Lives Matter. I don't think causing this kind of chaos, breaking into Apple, is Black Lives Matter. I don't care what you say. I don't care what their shirt says. What happened in Atlanta when, the gentleman got shot at the Wendy's, and then like a week later, somebody shot a kid there? It's like you got a mayor who's fighting for in the wake of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, making change. A gentleman got shot in the back at the Wendy's. Oh, he didn't get shot in the back. He got shot at the Wendy's, and then like you guys can't keep it together. And there's a young kid who got 6 years old got shot at that same Wendy's a week later, and you're yelling Black Lives Matter. I think that's wrong. And I think somebody has to say that, because you just can't, just because you're Black, you have the right to say Black Lives Matter when your actions are not as such. Just because you're a woman and you had a bad date doesn't mean you should be yelling Me Too, because you can use that moniker in order to create more issues for the assailant or whatever it may be in your eyes. I think you have to be much more understanding and respectful of the movement. And people need to say that, because if we don't say anything about it, these movements will then become nothing. They won't become anything. They'll just become, great starts and failed finishes.
Thank you. I really appreciate
There's a student thank you, Steve. We're going to get a little bit of whiplash because there's a very different question, different topic from a student that was in the chat earlier. Is it Sean Farhadian? If you're still on and ask your question.
That's me.
Oh, hey, Sean. You want to go and ask your question?
Sure. Yeah. I hate to kind of like diverge away from this, but I see also like thinking
another question. If you want to follow up on this, please go ahead. I'm encouraging follow-ups. Oh, did we lose him?
He's on mute. Sean, you're on mute.
I think he froze.
Yep. Sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right. Cool. Sorry. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Sean. I'm from New York, so I'm a big Knicks fan. So I'm aware that you're getting involved with the team to kind of help reshape their branding and their image along with Worldwide West, William Wesley. And so I was interested in knowing more about your decision to join them and what you're looking to accomplish, especially just given like your extensive and accomplished background in advertising and branding and stuff like that. So I thought it was like a really interesting hire, and I was curious to hear more about what you want to accomplish and your decision behind joining them.
So I, as a sports fan, I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. And a lot of people don't like the owner of the Cowboys, Jerry Jones. Growing up as a Yankee fan, a lot of people didn't like George Steinbrenner. I believe that when you're an owner of a team, what I like is when the owner is willing to spend money, pay and get the best talent, and go for it. Like, that's the kind of ownership I want. And, you know, Jim Dolan gets a lot of bad press and a lot of things. And from my experience with him, I just see somebody who has put their money where their mouth is, had a diverse front office, and it didn't work out. But the Knicks is one of the greatest franchises in the world. The Yankees, Manchester United, the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Knicks. That's how I see it. So it's a great opportunity to work with a owner who really is willing to put their money where their mouth is and invest in the team, and help turn this thing around. That was really my decision. I built my agency. We built the Brooklyn Nets logo, the branding, everything. And it was good, but the truth of the matter is it wasn't the same because it was the Brooklyn Nets. It wasn't the New York Knicks, you know? And I wanted to take my talents to New York City and bring it and bring it to the Knicks. So that's the reason why I did it. I mean, you know, I look at a lot of other teams, the Knicks get all this attention. Imagine being a fan of like the Sacramento Kings. Nobody says anything about their owner. They don't put any money into winning, right? The Orlando Magic, no one says anything about them not winning. It's like I don't want to be a part of an organization that's, you know, being complacent is fine. I want to be part of an ownership team that are trying to go for the rings. You know, it's what Mark Cuban is doing. It's what Jim Dolan does. It's what the Buses are doing in Los Angeles. They go for it, you know, and it doesn't win. It doesn't happen every single time. You're going to have bad teams and expensive bad teams, but ultimately it turns around. And I'm all for that in sports. But there's a lot of people who don't mind, you know, being mediocre for 40 years and, you know, and nothing happening. No one says anything about that. I'm not down with that.
Awesome. So I'm going to add, Steve, if you have time for one or two more questions.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So Roderick.
Yeah, that's right. Hello, Steve.
Hey, how you doing, Roderick?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to meet you like this because I grew up in Africa, and I was introduced to you at the first time that I was introduced to Nas by my brother. He was one who would always shout you out, Steve Stoute. He was like, who's this commissioner? Who's this guy that it's such a pleasure to finally get to meet you like this and talk to you. As a longtime friend of Nas, and just watching you through your career, how you've managed to reinvent yourself, and now you've always been behind the scenes in the music industry. So the people that really get to know you, they'll really have to be really like music fans that want to know who makes the decisions behind the scenes. And I just want to find out, how have you managed to reinvent yourself? I've just completed my bachelor's in, my master's in communication management, and I've been in HR for about 20 years now, and I'm going through mid-career change. And I just want to find out how you've managed to reinvent yourself. How do you keep yourself relevant, and how do you keep going?
Well, I mean, that change came, as I talked about the Men in Black story, when I went from music, you know, the commissioner, Steve Stoute, to an advertising executive. And when I made that decision, a lot of people said, you're leaving Jimmy Iovine to go make advertising? What's wrong with you? But I believe in myself. I believe that I had something big that I could bring to the world, and something that will actually be more important if I brought it to the advertising business than being in the business. And there was a lot of people that told me that I was crazy and I shouldn't have done it. But that's my point about being an entrepreneur. Like, I am really, truly unhireable from that. I'm not, I listen to myself and I'm going to go for it. Like, I was fine, but if I'm working in you know, if you're working for Jimmy Iovine, who's one of the smartest, nicest, most accomplished executives in the world, specifically in music, and that's not comfortable, that means you're unhireable. So I had to go my other way. So the transition, Roderick, is part of life. You got to transition. We all got to transition. Like the transition, I don't even like that word. Like you got to evolve. You have to evolve, and you got to evolve to your passion. You got to evolve to what makes you get up every day and do your thing, because that answers your next question. How do you keep going? You keep going by evolving. If I didn't evolve, I would not keep going. If I was still managing artists, I'd be jumping out of windows.
Thank you.
All right. Last question.
Alex, you have one last question that you popped in about the music industry.
Yeah, I just really want to touch upon something, because I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed, the increase in just independent labels, I guess, like groups, Internet Money, 10K projects, those kind of things. So I was curious to know, I mean, a lot of people are kind of steering away from the traditional label. How
did you notice that?
How did I notice that? Oh, because I mean, I work with a couple of artists, and I know that I've worked at a label, so I've noticed that a lot of people don't want to take a record deal just too early, because they think that they've got it all on their independent platforms, with like Instagram and their own independent platforms as an artist. So I was wondering what you think the role distribution services are gonna take in the future with that, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense. You know, again, this encapsulates this dialogue really well. When I first had the idea for United Masters 3.5 years ago, I am telling you, people thought I was crazy. People thought I was crazy. They did not believe that, they couldn't see, why would an artist want to go independent and not be with a record company? That's the goal. To get the money and get the record. And I'm like, that's going to change. The next generation of artists are going to see social media as MTV and Apple and Spotify as the record store, and they're going to want to know why they need a record company in the middle. And people thought I was nuts. Again, to the point about being an entrepreneur. I had to keep going anyway. And it was very, very hard. And in fact, when I was building it, I thought I had not a shortcut, but an accelerator. I was going to give Chance the Rapper equity in the company and money to help promote United Masters, since he was already a well-known independent artist. He had a manager who was a jealous person of me and didn't want me to work with his artists, because people in the music business are petty like that sometimes. And Chance, wasted my time for 6-7 months. And during that period of time when I thought I was getting them, I spent money thinking that it was going to work. And like I said, it cost him nothing to waste your time. He's a good man. He wasted my time. And coming out of that, I was it pushed me to the limit of my belief in what I'm doing. And in a nutshell, time just started to evolve where artists started celebrating on the internet getting out of record deals. And I seen very few people celebrating getting in record deals. When I grew up, people would take a picture with their new record company and they'd be like, oh, we made it. Now I'm seeing, thank God I just finished my last album. I'm out of my deal with Interscope. Russ being independent, and others, or artists being independent. So I just decided that's what I was going to do, stick to my guns. And the role of a distributor now is to actually provide services. So not only did we distribute United Masters artists, we have 600,000 artists on our platform now, but we also have deals with ESPN to get artists' music synced in ESPN Sports Center and other programming. And the NBA, when you look at the NBA posts, their social media posts and in-game programming, a lot of it is United Masters music. Or even when you go to the Apple, Apple Music, we launched a playlist with them called Baseline, which is for independent artists. They ran a commercial that ran on the NBA game 1 of the finals the other day with an artist named Toby Nwagawi. I told Willow, you should listen to this guy. He's outrageously talented. Nigerian artist out of Houston. And adding services turns us from a utility. A distributor could just be a utility, like PSC&G, a utility, or you could actually develop a community. And when you build services around it, like a record company in your pocket, whereas that's what we position ourselves as: distribution, payments, merch, brand sync opportunities. So you have a holistic solution within your phone in the app. And we built that, we're building that, and it's super successful. And I will tell you, if I listened to other people, Alex, 3 years ago, I would have shut it down. Everybody doubted me. People who know me and I believe love me thought I was putting my career at risk.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you.
Steve Stoute, we're going to let that be the last word and the last question. And you certainly did bring it all full circle. Thank you, as always, for being incredibly generous with your time and with your wisdom. And we look forward to seeing what corner you're going to be looking around next.
Thank you so much. Hey, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody. Willow, anytime for you. I think what you're doing is magical, honestly. I think you are taking your experiences, your access, and you guys are getting a phenomenal education, but you're getting other things that are not even, Willow's going above and beyond, using her relationships to make sure that you guys get it all. And because of that effort and the belief that she has in you, it's easy for me to come do this talk with you guys.
Awesome, Stephen. As you can see, these students are pretty special. And I think, helping them reach their potential will allow us all to reach ours. So
anybody in music, such as Alex, that are interested in what we're doing in music or product marketing, Willow, just send them my way. We are hiring. We are looking at people. So if it's a real thing, then we are definitely interested in taking on that opportunity.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care, Steve.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
Thank you so much.